Not sure about you, but have you ever been around someone who insists they don't have a problem? They laugh at dinner. They say they just like to unwind. They point out that they still go to work, still pay their bills, still function. But you notice how they scan the room at a party, not for people, but for the bar. Or you notice how irritated they get if the night goes by without a drink. And you sit there thinking, if everything is under control, why does it feel like something isn't? This got me thinking. When we talk about alcohol dependence, most people imagine rock bottom, job loss, broken relationships, complete chaos. But psychology tells a much more complicated story. Psychiatrist and addiction researcher Dr. Gabor Mate argues that addiction is not primarily about pleasure. It's about relief. Relief from pain. Relief from anxiety. Relief from something the person may not even have words for. In simple terms, alcohol often isn't the problem. It's the solution. A solution that eventually becomes the problem. Researchers describe addiction as a form of emotional regulation. Instead of processing difficult emotions internally, the brain learns to regulate them chemically. And here's where it usually begins. Research suggests it often comes from one of two sources. The first is unresolved emotional pain, trauma, chronic stress, neglect, instability. Not always dramatic trauma. Sometimes just growing up in an environment where emotions weren't safe to express. If anger was punished, if sadness was dismissed, if vulnerability was met with silence. Alcohol becomes a quick way to reset the nervous system. It lowers anxiety, quiets intrusive thoughts. The second source is modeling. If you grow up watching adults cope with stress through alcohol, celebrating with it, grieving with it, relaxing with it, your brain quietly logs that as normal. No one announces it, but the script installs itself. It's like installing a fire suppression system in your brain that activates every time emotional heat rises, even when there's no actual fire. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between discomfort and danger, so it reaches for what works. And here's where the contradictions start. They say they drink to relax, but without it, they become more anxious. They say it helps them sleep, but their sleep quality gradually declines. They claim it makes them more social, but over time their relationships become more shallow and strained. On the surface, the logic doesn't fully hold, but the psychology does. Because alcohol isn't solving the external problem, it's regulating the internal state. Some people use alcohol as a form of control, which sounds paradoxical. Clinical psychologist Dr. Sarah Newcomb notes, when life feels unpredictable, people grab the one lever that reliably changes how they feel. If you can't control work, relationships, or uncertainty about the future, you can control your internal state. One drink, and the world feels softer. 2. Edges blur. 3. Quiet descends. In a chaotic world, that predictability becomes seductive. And that's why you see paradoxical behavior. They're disciplined in their career, highly functional, even successful, but the drinking ritual becomes essential. They preach moderation in other areas of life, but become defensive if anyone questions their drinking. They minimize consumption, but plan their whole week around when they can safely drink again. Over time, friends and partners notice patterns. Emotional distance grows. Conflicts are avoided. Isolation gradually increases stress, which then increases drinking again. It becomes a feedback loop that feels protective from the inside, but destructive from the outside. Here's the irony. Most people with alcohol dependence drink to feel less anxious, less lonely, less overwhelmed. But long-term alcohol misuse increases baseline anxiety, deepens loneliness, and destabilizes emotional regulation. They drink to escape discomfort, but the escape gradually creates more of it. It was never really about alcohol. It was about pain, about regulation, about control, about relief. The substance is just the vehicle. You can remove alcohol, but if the underlying emotional system hasn't been addressed, the brain will find another regulator. Work, food, control. Anything that quickly shifts state. Addiction isn't about weakness. It's adaptation. An adaptation that once made sense and then calcified into habit. If anything here made you uncomfortable, that's good. Discomfort is often the first crack in denial. Denial isn't stupidity. It's protection. If you want more conversations about the behavior beneath the surface, not to judge, but to understand, subscribe.